baby boomers.
I used to be with it.
Millennials.
Okay, boomer.
Generation X.
What's going on?
And Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacy and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program, when I teach our intro to political science class, one of the first things that we discuss is that you have politics and you have political science, and they're not the same thing.
This is the time of year in an election year when I'd really rather think about other things. That doesn't always work. I engage with family members. Sometimes the first thing they want to talk about is the thing that I'm trying to forget or avoid.
So you lost your soul in the finance department, and that was it.
I would be more excited about promoting the results of my research if it lined up more with my personal political perspective.
And now, here are James and Emily. Good morning, Emily.
This has lost its novelty, James.
I know. Well, you know.
I love it. The deflated balloon. Yes. Tell me about your woes, my friend.
It is the last week of the semester, last week of classes. Finals week next week. I think I'm done with students for a while.
Yeah, I feel you.
I just, although I shouldn't complain this too much. At least the classes that I teach on campus have been pretty good. The students that have shown up have at least been engaged.
That's true. Yeah.
And I always do a fun activity the last day of class where I just let them ask me anything they want to ask, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about government. So I always get some personal questions and some government questions in the mix, and we kind of have a good time. In my morning class, I brought donuts, and in my evening class, I brought pizza. So,
I know your standard.
It was nice. It was nice and had some fun questions. And I had a student. It's been the first time in 2 or 3 semesters that anybody's asked me this, but I had a student ask, what my political affiliation is. Oh, yeah. And so I said, well, let's see if you guys can guess.
Mm-hmm. I know you love that game.
And they, I had one, some said you're a Republican, some said you're a Democrat, some said, no, you're independent. And so I was like, I feel like I did my job well. So,
yeah, absolutely.
You can't figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm okay. So, but so we had a nice time, had some pizza or donuts. So I haven't ate well this week, and haven't been in the gym either.
Yeah,
so
'tis the season. Yeah, I've probably eaten my, weight loss and Christmas cookies this week. So yeah, I understand. It's definitely one.
But I am definitely looking forward to a break. I've got this thing called a dissertation that is still
I hear about this
not
thing
moving
sometimes.
forward very, very quickly. That I need to.
They tend not to.
Well, especially when you ignore them for a couple of months and don't do what you need to be doing.
Yeah, I don't have experience with that though. Never had the luxury of my psychology doesn't allow me to ignore things. So fortunately, I never got that luxury to just put that thing down.
Well, and me, I'm kind of like the. There's the new bright shiny thing. I need to go chase that. So my attention span can be short-lived.
It happens. But we love you. We love you for it. And you're going to get that dissertation done. By God. I'm going to push you up that hill.
I think I'm going to just have to seclude myself off for about the next 6 months.
You're going to be fine. I don't
work on that.
That doesn't bode well.
We'll see.
We'll see, because I don't see that happening.
They expect me to defend in the next fall. So I better do something, right?
You should probably do something soon. Yes.
Yeah. We have a guest today.
We do.
Why don't you tell everybody who our guest is?
Oh, I get to introduce the guest.
Yes.
That seems apropos. I've known Dr. Kenneth Kickham for a very, very long time, probably longer than you, although you were older than me, Professor Davenport.
I don't know. He was around when I went through my master's program, I think.
Which was
maybe
after
he might have
me.
been a new professor.
When did you
start at UCO?
2005.
Okay, so just after me then.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It was not.
I don't think so.
So I got my master's in 2000. So, but I was adjuncting when he started. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So Kickham is public administration, and we don't fault him for it. It is certainly not my favorite part of political science.
It's not my area of specialty either.
But he does work on some pretty interesting policy issues. Poverty has been one of his pet projects for as long as I've known him, which has been some like 15 or so years, like 20 years. I don't know how long. I'll be 40 in December.
Oh, we've probably known each other 15 years at least.
Yeah, it's been a long time, man. So yeah, it's been interesting to kind of watch you grow, obviously, in your research. And I say that like, I'm in some sort of position to qualify your research and your existence and expertise. But it's cool to know you. So I don't know if that was a great introduction or not, but...
Did you also work for a state agency for a while?
I did.
Okay.
I worked for Oklahoma Department of Human Services.
I thought so, yeah. So it has a mix of kind of the academic research kind of, and then actual real world experience in what he researches. So yeah.
That was probably having worked at that job for a while that helped me as I was applying to UCO. I think that was maybe part of why I ended up getting selected because of the experience I had in state government. Yeah. I mean, that's part of it, I think.
What was your capacity at DHS?
I started out as a program evaluator. This was back in the late 90s when welfare reform was something that was being discussed by both parties and both houses and the executive. And so it was what we would call a hot topic back then, and the subject of my dissertation and the reason I was hired at DHS. And then I moved into the finance division at DHS shortly before I applied at UCO.
Mm-hmm. So you lost your soul in the finance department, and that was it.
Well, I think I reached a point at the agency where I was kind of less welcome in the program evaluation unit, and so I looked to find some other thing to do at the agency, and then once you leave a job that is kind of your passion, you keep looking because working I was a comptroller for DHS, and that wasn't very satisfying. I think I got that job because of my accounting background. So nothing against accounting or accountants, but it's less exciting than some of the other things I've had the pleasure of doing.
Certainly for a state agency. Yeah. It's a little mundane. Fair enough.
Well, do we have some icebreaker questions we want to run him through? Yes?
Oh, yeah, sure.
All right, okay. All right. So first question we always ask, Generation X, Millennial, Boomer, Z, where do you fall in that categorization?
Well, I was born at the end of the baby boomers, but okay. I don't like to think of myself as a boomer. I like to think of myself as Gen X.
We'll accept that. As an official member of Generation X, I will certainly accept any and all who want to join our club because we don't have a lot of us compared to the others. Right. So,
I've always been about 10 years behind in what I do in life. Okay. So I tell myself that I'm 10 years younger than I actually am, and that puts me solidly in Gen X.
Absolutely. Right. The delusion is real. What are you currently reading, watching, or listening to?
That is a great question, but it's really more what I'm refusing to engage with.
Fair enough. That's a great question.
The election season is exhausting, and the election result has a feeling of finality to it, even though, these elections roll around regularly. When when a presidential election is decided, there's a finality to it in my mind, and I tend to disengage and just sort of let the thoughts about the new administration just sort of dissipate. Because during the campaign, I'm hyper-focused on it. So then after the election, I sort of as a survival or coping technique, I just disengage from that. Whether I'm happy with the result or not, this is the time of year in an election year when I'd really rather think about other things. But that doesn't always work. I engage with family members.
Sure.
And sometimes the first thing they want to talk about is the thing that I'm trying to forget or avoid. So
we briefly discussed this before we came on the program, but I know your answer to this, but I have to ask it anyway. Favorite social media?
I guess what I've been doing lately is just consuming and not participating. I go to YouTube and I look at YouTube, what they call YouTube Shorts. And so I just consume them. And maybe I comment once in a great while on something, but usually not. I used to be more active on social media, maybe 5 years ago or more. And it, like a lot of people, maybe, I got less and less satisfaction out of it as the years would go by. I noticed a pattern of, I guess the word to describe it is polarization. You can think of it as sort of two camps, each in their own, information, ecosystem. And there's not so you end up either engaging positively with folks in your bubble or fighting to the death with folks in the other bubble. Yeah. So I kind of had enough of that. I can remember the 2016, and even within my bubble, there was division because there were two candidates in my bubble vying for the presidential nomination, and so even in my own bubble, it turned into ugliness. I'm not one to back down from a dialogue or even a little bit of an argument, but if that's really as pervasive, nowadays as it was 5-10 years ago, I think maybe I'm more psychologically healthy for distancing myself from social media.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like you're actively unplugged and sort of doom scrolling, right? You're just sort of right on the margins, the fringes, and a lot of people are, I think, in that little camp of reality. I do it a lot. I don't comment a lot. I repost, retweet, things like that, but I don't share my personal opinions very often.
It can be scary to share your personal opinions when you have a public profile, sure. Even a very minor public profile like a teacher. You're reminded once in a while of your publicness when you're just out in the world and someone says, hey, I remember you from when I took your class, and it just reminds you that there's a publicness to what you do.
What's one event that occurred in your lifetime that's had the most impact on your political views or beliefs?
Wow. I guess back in the 80s, I took a chance and worked for a nonprofit, and it was a community organizing nonprofit. And so I didn't last very long because it's very hard work. And at the time, I really wasn't fully ready to work that hard for this nonprofit, but it did open my eyes to a lot of concerns, right here in Oklahoma City, and actually this was Tulsa. So, but there, I've lived in Tulsa and Oklahoma City, and when you start to see the bad side of town, the poverty areas in a city like that. It kind of opens your eyes and it influences your politics. I also had a good friend who was a generation older than myself. He would talk about the days of his hero was FDR, and there were no FDRs in my political lifetime. But it's inspirational to think that someone who cares about the disadvantaged among us can be so well regarded in the history of our country, and it's kind of inspirational to think that you can make a difference. And so it was in the 80s probably that my politics really solidified.
Tell us about your research, past and present. What was your favorite thing that you've kind of explored or analyzed, and conclusions that you've reached, and what are you currently working on?
Conclusions are probably not the thing
that's
that get me excited.
Yeah, that's not a great word for political science. I agree.
Yeah, the thing about research that has surprised me is, I come at my research projects, with a definite political perspective. Sure. On a certain side of the spectrum, always, not ever on the other side. But when you do social science, you're kind of trapped by the data you collect. Absolutely. So it's not as if you can start with a hypothesis that you kind of believe in, and then you collect data and it confirms it. Yeah. Usually the data you collect and you analyze it, it comes out a little different than you expected. Right. And in fact, if people were to look at all of the articles that I've worked on, and it's always a team effort, the best way to get published is to have a good team and pick the right journal. So if you were to look at all of the studies that I've been involved with, you wouldn't really get a sense that there's a left or right tilt. That's not to say that they didn't start out with a tilt, but the data kind of shove you to the middle most of the time. And, maybe you get to affirm something from your perspective, but it's always counterbalanced with something that you found that is less supportive of your perspective, or maybe points the other direction. Yeah. The most recent thing that I've been involved with, which will appear in January 2025, it's kind of nice. I've already got my 2025 pub out of the way.
Nice. Good for you. We love that.
It was with folks in the business school. And so this was about what they had done was they had put their business students through a competition, a sales competition, and then they scored all of the students from low to high, 63, 67, 74, all the way up. And there were about 90 students. And so we also administered a survey to them, which was trying to get at how morally relativistic or morally absolutist they are. Mm-hmm. And so the hypothesis going in was that if you score higher on moral relativism, our hypothesis was that you would also be maybe scoring higher on your sales performance. Mm-hmm. And we had a hard time finding a journal that was kind of amenable to the idea, or I should say we had a hard time getting past reviewers who were amenable to the idea that salesmanship requires moral relativism, which if you're in the field of ethics, moral relativism is kind of a challenge to get your head around. So it did turn out to be somewhat confirmed. Moral relativism in our little sample turned out to be somewhat associated with, doing well in a sales performance exercise.
Because you can be flexible, correct? Right.
That's exactly
with what you're trying to hawk.
That's exactly right. And I think the word we used was adaptive, but exactly. As you're going through a sales performance exercise, your moral relativism allows you to
tailor it, to the audience or to,
exactly. Change course in the middle of your sales pitch if you need to.
That's genius. Yeah, I like that. Okay, Kickham, I'll let you get in here. Or, I'm sorry, Dad, James. I'll let you get in here in just a second. I do want the audience to know that Dr. Kickham absolutely ruined Wallerstein for me. So I would like for you to tell the dear listeners about your article that you wrote on Wallerstein. God, what was that? 15 probably years ago, that absolutely just ruined me.
Tell me more about it.
Oh, you don't remember your Wallerstein? It was so just grandiose. I don't like Wallerstein anyway, just in terms of the universality and.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, I'm a big fan of Wallerstein.
I know you are.
I can't remember exactly what you're referring to, but I'll
have to pull that one up and send it to you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sneak attack you.
But I actually quoted Wallerstein to one of my students just last week. Because
what was the quote? Yes, give us the context.
The student was expressing something that really fit with world system theory and even used some of the same terminology. And so I just said, that's Wallerstein. And so that was my quote. That's Wallerstein.
That's Wallerstein. Wonderful. That's fabulous. I don't know. I as a, IR comparative person, I just have some. It's a little antiquated in the way I think some of the world system theory led a little credence to sort of Orientalism and sort of the division of cultures and things like, I don't know. Anyway, well, I've got problems with Wallerstein.
I think the takeaway from Wallerstein for me is that at certain times of flux in societies, small changes can have big impacts. Sure. I think that, there's a lot of traditional Marxist perspective in Wallerstein, which I find really, helpful and compelling. But actually, it's his sort of, economic background and way of looking at things that I think adds a lot of nuance and usefulness, especially, economists talk about really what matters is what happens at the margins, right? What's your marginal tax rate, for instance? And so Wallerstein identifies certain key moments in history where just a little bit of change can really change everything. So, how we respond to, for instance, climate change is beginning to look like something that's going, where little things are going to have a big impact.
Hi, Dad.
How are you?
What do you got?
Are you enjoying your conversation? I'm just kind of hanging out, listening. You mentioned something about political scientists and we approach research and we all have our certain perspectives, our certain way of seeing the world. And then we have to mesh that up with what the data presents us with. And I think it's always a challenge sometimes for political science students to be able to separate, advocacy with research, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to use my research as an advocacy tool. And it doesn't really work out real well taking that approach, right? You're either you're going to have to tone down your advocacy or you're going to have to, kind of cherry pick the data to make your research validate your advocacy. And so I think that's always a struggle that students have is understanding. And when I teach our intro to political science class, one of the first things that we discuss is that you have politics and you have political science and they're not the same thing. And you need to be able to, it's okay to wear both hats. You just have to know when you're wearing which hat, right? Yeah. And so I find myself all the time trying to, there are things that I will certainly voice my opinion about, but I try not to abandon my commitment to my discipline in the advocacy of that, right? Which can mean sometimes I pull back from what I really would like to say because I don't have all the research that can substantiate that, right? And I think I just think it's very challenging to kind of try to figure out which hat am I wearing, how do I present this so that I don't lose legitimacy in either position that I find myself in.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it comes out in a research methods class or a statistics class where when you talk about different traditions in research, For instance, I consider myself very mainstream. There are theories out there that are accepted, and so you derive a hypothesis from that theory and you test it. That's kind of what I feel that I do in life. But then, so I'm quantitative primarily, but there's also, to be really clumsy about it, there's also qualitative. And when I think of qualitative, I usually think of kind of a postmodern perspective that says, folks who do what I do are really kind of missing a lot of the point, because the classic critique of that the postmoderns bring to the table is that we just sort of reify a status quo when we limit ourselves to accepted theories and we test hypotheses. And so we have this idea of how the data will turn out, that it will fit with an accepted theory. It seems to the postmodernists that's a little bit of simply reifying the status quo. And of course, the critique of that is that you end up not really contributing to the solution of real problems that exist for actual people today. So then the other camp, which I admire greatly, the qualitative postmodern folks, folks who understand, the effects of intersectionality and, how we, whose goal is to get us out of a mindset that's kind of where we kind of have preordained conclusions. In fact, the whole project of testing hypotheses is questionable because it's purposefully limiting. We say we're not going to proceed unless the theory that generates our hypothesis is accepted. So, and what the other folks do, what the postmodernists do, is they say, what problems have you guys solved? And really, what are you missing? And so what I really admire about the qualitative postmodernists is the reminder that, what we do maybe has value, but definitely what we do, mainstream folks like myself, we do miss a lot of what's important to people who are actually living today.
I think what I have observed a lot, some trends going on is people just collecting the data and looking at without coming in with a hypothesis that this is going to be, it's like, we're just going to look and see what the data reveals to us, and then make some conclusions based on that, and then kind of abandoning that. Well, we're going to derive our questions from this particular theoretical standpoint and develop these hypotheses, and then see if the data confirms that or doesn't. And so it's something that I've noticed some folks doing lately.
Yeah, the temptation is always there to do what I would call what you just described. I'd call it data mining. Uh-huh. And of course, data mining can be a very good thing in certain situations. If you're, if you're a large language model, if you're in marketing, data mining can be really useful. But if you're testing hypotheses, data mining is an ethical no-no, right, of course. Right. And so, of course, when you're sitting there in front of your screen and you have this wonderful data set in front of you, and you can just keep digging and digging until you find something that backs up your perspective, that'd be very nice. For me, the challenge is just to find in the data something that actually does address the hypothesis I had going in. And so it's a challenge enough just to meet your original goals, much less to develop new goals as you're looking through the data and noticing things. So, I like the sort of rigorous process. The ones that the postmoderns hate. I like how it, sort of keeps me from, coming to conclusions that I really can't support, according to the positivist methodology. I'm fully sympathetic to critiques of positivism. I consider myself, intellectually a post-positivist, but I still do my job as if I were a positivist. I still follow those guidelines and try to maintain that rigor.
Well, at some point, we have to be able to, in some way, shape, or form, verify claims that we make, right? And the best method that we know to do that is kind of the scientific method as we apply it in the social sciences when we're exploring different phenomenon that we're researching. And so I think that, to me, that's always the tension with kind of the postmodernist who sometimes will make claims, but then when we apply the kind of positive approach, we don't always see those claims verified, and then there's some tension there.
But numbers can't tell the entire story, correct?
That's very true.
They
yes.
can't tell the entire story, but they can tell a large portion of the story, I think.
Right. But another good critique of positivism is we tend to infuse meaning to numbers as soon as they come out correlational. And that's, a lot goes into measurement. What do you choose to observe? How do you choose to measure it? There are all different ways to measure the same thing. And it can make a great deal of difference how you decide to measure a phenomenon.
And I think I don't necessarily think those tensions are bad, because they force us to think through things, right? They force us to try to figure out what other ways of seeing the world can I adapt to how the approach I take that can give me a better understanding of what's going on, the phenomenon that's occurring, right? Yeah.
Right. And as you go through your career, year in and year out, trying to get your articles published in journals, what really keeps you from getting too far away from the rigor that we all try to keep is the reviewers. If you're measuring something in a way that could possibly be measured a different way and would as a result turn out to a different conclusion, reviewers are aware of this. They will note it, because the reviewers have probably looked at the same issue themselves. They've probably looked at other data that gets at the same concept, and they will question why you're measuring it this way instead of this other way, and how did that affect your conclusion? Right. But for positivists, we don't often get criticized because our conclusions are just wildly ambitious. We normally, I think, get criticized because our conclusions are so watered down and limited and qualified that people wonder if we're contributing anything at all.
Well, that can often be revealed. I've seen articles and such just discussing the amount of research that nobody ever actually pays attention to, right? That gets very few citations, gets very few reads, this kind of thing. And so, to what extent I've published this piece of research, but if it's not influencing anybody, it's like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it matter?
And it really affects you over the course of your career. I think it affected me when I was first doing this. I would get, like, if an article was accepted for publication, and they would send the proof to the author, and they would say, look this over and make sure there aren't any errors. I mean, I would meticulously go through it, making sure that not even a decimal place was wrong, and no symbols are wrong. Because I thought, what if someone sees this and there's a typo and they don't get what I intended them to get. But as you go through this year after year after year, you start to realize what you just said, which is, if you're lucky, a half a dozen people will ever see this thing. And so you say to yourself, well, here I've got the proof. I'm going to look through it, and if it kind of looks all right to me, I'll just say, fine. It looks all right to me. I won't send in a correction to every typo. I won't say, this table could be a little bit prettier. I used to do these things. In my imagination, so many people would be seeing this article. Of course, over the years, I've learned there's a chance that no one will ever see this article. And so I really devote a lot less, meticulous attention to making sure that every single typed character in the article is exactly right. So it's just a reflection of learning that the impression you make is less than you thought it would be earlier in your career.
I like to maintain the delusion.
Do you? So let's say you're going to have a paper published in 2025. Do you share that with people? How do you promote that you did that? Or do you just like, okay, it's published and I'm on to the next thing?
That tree fell in the woods.
I've never promoted it. I've always had this idea that if it's worthy of attention, that it will be found. It turns out I'm very wrong about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're going to have to work on that. Right.
At some point, I don't know, at some point you say to yourself, I guess I said to myself, the point is to get it out there. And if people find it, that's great. But people probably aren't going to find it. When I was younger and first starting out, I had sort of delusions of grandeur, like, okay, Kickham, you published this article. It's amazing. Probably the New York Times and the Washington Post will be calling to ask about it. Of course, none of that ever happened. And I've been doing it 20 years now or more. So now I realize where I fit in, in the hierarchy of the information age. I'm kind of at the bottom of a pyramid of knowledge, just sort of buried, but foundational, but buried.
Yeah, there's not a lot of ego that goes into being an academic.
You start off with more ego than you finish up with.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, I think Gatch kind of wrapped that up with a nice little bow at our OPSA dinner.
That's one of the things that I'm really trying to work on with fellow political science. There are so many questions that we have researched in some form or fashion, right? And it seems like we do an okay job of talking to each other, but not a great job of just sharing with each other. And we do an abysmal job of sharing what we have done with the general public, right? And so we're questions of, we have questions of what spurs voter turnout, or questions of, are open primaries better than closed primaries, or all of these kind of questions that, that are coming up. And lo and behold, we've done some pretty good research on some of this stuff. And yet nobody is, as you mentioned, nobody's really talking about that. And it doesn't seem to influence the public discourse a whole lot. I think we need to change that. I think our conversations would be better informed, at least, if people were engaged with the body of knowledge that we've created on a whole range of issues. And that doesn't mean, it's not like every political scientist thinks the same thing about open or closed primaries or any of these other things, but at least we can be working from a common body of knowledge as we discuss those, which I think would be really helpful.
Right. I think there's a tension between being a public intellectual and being, someone like myself who's, not a public intellectual. Once you become someone that people know as a researcher, someone who can translate research into something that normal people. I firmly believe researchers are not normal. Public intellectuals they occupy an interesting space in what we do, and they lose a little bit, I think, of the legitimacy among folks like myself who are not public intellectuals. It could be jealousy, it could be envy, it could be something like that. But I think of the public intellectual as a qualitatively different role for a researcher than what I do. But yeah, if I were able to, so I would be more excited about promoting the results of my research if it kind of lined up more with my personal political perspective. If my results didn't always sort of drag me away from that, at least in some form, then I'd be more excited about sharing it. But I realize that, any study that I'm a part of, and it's always a team effort, but any study that I'm a part of is just one little pebble contributed to a mountain of pebbles, really a mountain range of pebbles. And so, that's my function in all of this. I'll leave the podcasts to Ezra Klein and people like that. They're much better at that kind of thing than I am anyway.
To me, the best public intellectuals are the ones who will share research from others, even if that research doesn't necessarily line up with their own personal perspectives because they want to share a body of knowledge. And they may be, I've done that before where I've shared something, some research someone has done, which I found really interesting. It might not have corresponded with my own personal political perspectives, but I thought it was interesting. I thought the way they reached their conclusions was pretty interesting. And I think, I just think there's a body of knowledge out there that can make our discussions on these things a little bit better. And it tends to get ignored. And I do think you're right. If you become a kind of the classical public intellectual, you end up sacrificing some of your credibility with researchers because you almost have to, right? You've leaned into kind of an advocacy role more than a research-based role. And I think that's always the tension. We discussed that earlier. That's always kind of the tension of which one do I want to be?
Yeah, and you see this. I see this personally in the international relations literature, which I find very interesting to read, fascinating, and useful. But because it tends not to be the kind of research I do, it tends not to be rigidly focused on the positivist method.
Right.
It tends to be qualitative and historically focused. That's the interesting stuff. When we assign readings and books in our classes, the interesting ones are not the ones that look like what I do. Yeah. The ones that look like what I do, no one wants to read. I think it's fun to look at articles like the ones I do because I always want to see what methods they used and how the numbers turned out. But that has very limited appeal. But take a book by a foreign policy expert, take an article from a foreign policy journal. Those are the big names in political science, year in and year out. The biggest public intellectuals, I think, in political science are the folks who are in international relations and to some degree comparative politics, but which neither of those are my field. But those are the books you assign that students actually like to read.
We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
You mentioned earlier, I'm sorry, now I'm dominating the conversation, but you mentioned earlier about having a team, a research, and I've noticed that being more and more the trend of not single author research publications and such, but multiple authors. And I've seen some that have had, close to 10 authors on the same paper. What's the advantage of that? And do you think those when you have multiple authors, do those carry more weight with reviewers or publications than one that just has a single author? Tell me about that a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. Taking the second question first, I don't think reviewers can tell really whether it's a multi-author or single author. Of course, it's blind reviewing.
Right.
And I would say every team I've worked on to get a publication, one person has sort of been designated to infuse the article with a unified voice. Okay, so if the finished article looked like if it resembled how it was put together, you would be looking at 4 different voices. One voice for this section, a different voice for that section, and so on. But a good team has one member who's able to put it in the right voice and unify it throughout. What was the first part of the question about teams?
So what are the advantages of having a team versus approach to doing the research?
Yeah, because I don't play well on teams.
It is a learned thing.
Yes.
It is not a natural thing.
It must be.
Right. It would be great if I could claim as single author all the articles that I'm a part of. But, division of labor is the first advantage, of course. So I get to kind of do what I'm good at on every article that I'm involved with. and that really, every team I'm on, I'm the one who does what I do, and nobody challenges me, nobody messes with me. They just leave me to do my part while they do their part. And I like that a lot. I don't particularly enjoy doing their part. I would rather do my part, which is the fun part for me. For instance, it is not my favorite thing to review the literature and then write it up. And that's to me, that's probably the most important part of any political science article is the literature review. As far as what we add to a discussion.
That's my least. I'm sorry. That's my least favorite part of writing.
My absolute favorite.
No, I like to get to the good part and do the fun stuff. And to me, that's not the lit review. But you'll have a co-author for whom that is something they're good at and they like. And so that's the advantage. You have people doing what they like. Another advantage that I've noticed with teamwork on articles is that you end up in just every conceivable discipline. I've worked with sociologists and anthropologists and many people in the business school, probably too much of that if I want to look like a well-rounded researcher. But I'm even part of an article that's in a journal called Biological Theory.
Interesting.
Which is kind of impressive sounding to me because I've never engaged in hard science in any way. So I just kind of like the title of that journal.
Right.
Another journal I like the title of is Journal of Poverty. And you asked me earlier what publication I'm most proud of. Probably it's not the publication so much, but the journal. I'm very proud of being in the Journal of Poverty, which is not a prestigious or elite journal. It's just a journal that it's dear to my heart. I have been in our discipline's flagship journal twice. So this is me bragging.
I didn't know that. Impressive.
And it's all about teamwork. I started out having teams of two, myself and a co-author. And as the years have gone by, like you said, there's this trend. And so now this article that's coming out in January, 4 of us worked on it and included a retired professor who his only role was to put the whole thing in the same voice. Okay. And you always need someone like that. Oh, I should say that's not his only role. His other role was championing the article through the reviewing process. Okay. And so since he's been doing this even longer than I have, he was just very good at that.
I love interdisciplinary approaches to research. I just think that you can learn so much from other perspectives on social phenomenon. And what's the largest team research publication, the largest team that you've had?
4.
4? Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd say the most frequently occurring number of co-authors is 2, okay. Followed by 3 and then 4. And I don't have any single author pubs at all.
Really?
Really, yeah.
That's, but I guess, like I said, that seems to be the trend now and interdisciplinary collaboration seem to really, when I have the opportunity to be part of that or to read something from multiple authors from different disciplines, it always seems to have some things in there that I might not have even thought of, outside of my own discipline. But that's the thing I love about political science is we can adapt almost any other discipline's approach to what we do, right? We can take from history, we can take from sociology, we can take from economics, we can take from all of these disciplines. And in some ways, I feel like we have an advantage in that we can integrate those a little bit easier than some of these other disciplines can do so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I would also add that, in our discipline, when you think about the luminaries, the big names, right. the Mount Rushmore or whatever, they tend to do single author works, and they are amazing. There are scholars in our discipline, dating all the way back to the behavioral era up to the present day. And you can tell that they didn't need one guy to smooth over the voice among several authors. You can it's a much more compelling read to to read an article from one of the big names in the field, you know that it came entirely from that person's mind, and there's a compelling unity throughout the article and of course they have the leeway to really do what they want because they know that it's going to get published. For one thing, there's a little bit of good old boy to this profession, but I would say that's a small thing. The main thing is that these folks really deserve their high status as scholars in our discipline because they are that impressive, and their work is that impressive.
So, all right. So, who are some of the ones that if they have something published, you're like, I need to read this to see what? So, who would you be following if you would?
Oh, okay. Well, currently, that's. I could talk more about the past than currently because, like you said, the trend is kind of away from the single scholar. I think that's been more legitimate in the past than it is today. But the first article in political science that I read that really impressed me and made me think, okay, this is something I might want to do, was written by a guy from Stanford called John Manley, and he wrote an article in 1971. I can't remember the name of it, but it's one of those things that you think that's kind of what changed my life. And it was so expertly written, and it sounded good in my head while I was reading it, and it was actually a critique of Robert Dahl and Charles Lindblom, so I guess my political science Mount Rushmore would contain folks like Dahl and Lindblom, and then this other guy, John Manley, who I don't know that he's well known at all. I really don't, but he wrote it in 1971. It was at the end of his career, and it's where he put together all of his disappointments with positivism and with American political science. And he said, we've been thinking about things all wrong, and we need to completely change how we think about things. And it was a pretty savage critique of Dahl and Lindblom, who I love. Yeah. I love them, especially Lindblom. Lindblom is probably among the scholars that I'm aware of, he's probably the one I am most personally impressed with. But we all assign Dahl. Another Gabriel Almond was a big hero of mine. So a lot of my heroes are dead by now, actually.
Yes, absolutely.
You got any burning questions you want to know? I've got I think one more on my to-do list.
No,
but
go for it.
When thinking about trends, what are some? We've talked about the kind of the collaboration, but what are some other trends that either you might think are good or bad that are happening in political science right now? What do you see as far as either research topics or approaches to research, and what are some of the positives or negatives that you see out there right now?
One of the things that really surprises me is the sort of the continuing prominence of positivism in a social science. I don't get the sense that political science has always been very concerned about whether positivism is good or bad, and whether post-positivism is good or bad. I don't know that sort of hand-wringing occurs in other disciplines the way it does in ours. So I guess the trend I see that I like is the mixed methods trend, where in a single article, not only will you have both qualitative and quantitative research going on, but there's a self-awareness of it. There's a self-consciousness, that there's an intention behind it, behind using mixed methods. And I think that's an acknowledgement that a lot of the critiques of this rigid positivist quantitative approach have really become internalized in the discipline. And I really do like that trend. It leaves a place for folks like myself. I don't know how long we will find it useful to add little pebbles to a mountain range of other pebbles. I'm not sure how long that will be considered a useful scholarly enterprise. I do think that qualitative research, international relations, books about the history of party systems in Europe. I mean, I think that'll always have a place there. That'll always be compelling. I do wonder if the positivist approach has a shelf life. So I think the trend is to keep checking the pulse of positivism, make sure it's still vibrant and vigorous.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on a wide range of things happening.
It was a pleasure. I'm happy that you guys asked me.
No, I will tell you, I love the discipline of political science. I mentioned it earlier. I just think we do interesting work. We do relevant work. We are a discipline that can, like I said, incorporate various means of investigation relatively easily into what we do. And I just wish more of what we do was a little bit more publicly available.
I do as well. Yeah.
Are we done? We're done. All right. We're going to get out of here. We want to remind everybody that
democracy is not a spectator sport.
We'll see you next time.
Hey everyone, this is Deborah, the resident Gen Z member of the Not My Generation podcast family. Not My Generation is produced in the Possibilities Inc. studio. This episode was produced by Lauren Peaches Keller. It was edited by Santiago Ramones. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Send a voice memo to notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu and you could hear your voice on an upcoming episode. If you liked today's episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the podcast with others. You can check out previous episodes on any podcast app and on our podcast website at notmygeneration.captivate.fm, where we also provide our show notes. And remember, you can follow Not My Generation on X, formerly known as Twitter, at NMG Podcast, and on Facebook at Not My Generation Podcast. We look forward to interacting with you soon.